Hello and welcome to the Program to BIM webinar for the AEC industry. This is webinar number 2 of 4. Each week we have a different theme. This week's focus is on the AEC industry. My name is Kimon Onuma of Onuma Inc. and we have a great set of panelists today. Matthew Anderley from AECOM, Hyde Griffith from Broadus & Associates, Stephen Hagen from Hagen Technologies, Fineth Jernigan, and from Design Atlantic, and Mike Bordenaro, who will be moderating the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting the recording to those that have signed up for the webinar. We also encourage you to post your questions into the question box inside the GoToWebinar UI user interface. And we will be taking questions through the chat window at the end of the session. We will be having a discussion between the panelists and then opening it up to the attendees. So thank you very much for attending today's session on Program to BIM. And one theme is going to be about minimum viable BIM, and you'll see what that is all about. So we have the support of the Asset Leadership Network. We would like to thank the Asset Leadership Network and the Building Smart Alliance. We are, a lot of us on this session actually are thought leaders from the Building Smart Alliance at the National Institute of Building Sciences, and we have been trying to push the edges of where the industry is going. This webinar is sponsored by Onuma System and BIMstorm. In last week's session, we focused on owners, the owner's point of view, and what they were thinking about. And we had John Roach from Murphy Tate, Renee Tejan from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Van Woods from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, also of the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership Subcommittee. So what we heard from the owners last week, it's actually recorded and online, and we will send a link to all that have signed up today as well. You can actually watch that session. It was very much from the owner's perspective, and a few things that we heard is that they want to start now. They want to see some value from BIM and from working on these complex projects or even simple projects. They want to start with a minimum viable BIM, a term that we've coined as part of these webinars that will help them today, not 5 years from now. In other words, they want to get things done today. They need to show value. They want to have standards-driven methods to use their information in any program, so not be only focused on one piece of software or a group of software. They want to test their processes before they use them live, so a way to kind of test in a sandbox environment before they go live. And Jim Dieter from the Asset Leadership Network has a great quote. He's the executive director of Asset Leadership Network, and he says, "You can divide assets into people, money, and stuff. And a lot of resources are spent on managing people and finances, but there isn't as much effort into managing stuff." And the stuff is everything about facilities, the buildings, the equipment inside the buildings, and even moving assets like fleet vehicles. And it's for the life cycle. So there's a concept of a project kind of ends, but assets and life cycle go on forever. And that's an opportunity for us as the AEC industry. How can we help owners manage their stuff better? And that's an exciting time to be here to kind of present that concept. Renee Tejan was going to try and log on. I'm not sure if she's here or not, but one of her quotes is about a medical facility being the largest piece of medical equipment that VA owns. Again, the concept of stuff. It's a piece of equipment, or an entire facility needs to support the objective of VA, to support their patients and the patient outcomes. And that's a direct connection between what an owner needs to do and the assets and facilities that go to support it. So if you take the word VA out or take the word healthcare out, you can pretty much plug in any owner. And each owner obviously has a unique perspective on things and their unique types of facilities they manage, but essentially it's the same thing. How can the assets and the facilities support the owner's needs? So Fineth Jernigan from Design Atlantic, are you ready to speak for a few minutes here?
I'm here, Kimon. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Thanks, fine.
Good afternoon, everyone. I guess unless you're in California, and then good morning. But Kimon, could you switch to the next slide for me? I guess my part of this is to just kind of put a framework, a box around what we're going to talk about today, oriented towards benefits to the AEC community. And there are basically 4 or 5 big concepts that I think all architects and engineers and contractors need to understand about where the what I call the big BIM industry is going. The side of the industry that's not just dealing with graphics, it's dealing with all the information that's surrounding us. First and foremost, from the AEC side, I think we all need to keep in mind that design and construction is a very small piece of the pie. Too many people in the AEC world focus only on that little design construct piece of pie, and there's a whole large segment of the industry that we have little or no involvement with. And in those larger other sections is where the opportunities lie to get the industry out of some of the peaks and valleys that we experience as the economy goes up and down, because many of these are things that happen much less directly tied to the economic conditions. People don't just walk away from buildings for the most part because we have a recession. They may have to, pull in their resources a bit, but some of these things go on. And architects and engineers and contractors and all those involved directly in the AEC side need to spread their wings and get into these other areas. Emphasizing what Kimon related to the Asset Leadership Network, the clients we're working with today are much less worried about projects than they used to be. They still come out with projects, but the projects are really couched in terms of assets, of their larger asset picture. They're beginning to realize that capital facilities are more than just a place to house people. They have a whole lot of other issues. And as the AEC industry, we have to start managing these assets for the owners we work for, rather than just one-off projects. Carrying right on with that, we also need to look at the technologies we're using to do this, not as software. The days of going out and buying a software package and saying, I've got the latest, greatest CAD or the latest, greatest BIM authoring tool is really rapidly going behind us. Those tools are still critical, but the idea now is to use technology as a force multiplier. And I think you'll see, particularly with some of the case studies that are going to come next, the value of the ability to use the data in simple ways to get much more out of what we do without it really being a software discussion. And then I'd like to close this piece with just leaving one quote that we heard many years ago from one of our clients. The data about our facilities is more valuable than the physical facilities themselves. This really takes off on what Renee Teachin was talking about with the medical facilities being their most expensive piece of medical equipment. The clients we're seeing, particularly multi-building, multi-use clients who are thinking about assets, their facilities are really important to them, but the information about their facilities and how they connect to the organization is really the key to what's going on here. And I think as we move forward here, we'll show you some more of that. Come on, will you flip one more time here? At the last discussion, John Roach, he was one of the leaders, people who made the California Community Colleges project. Seeing California Community Colleges was maybe the first full-bore implementation of a big BIM type approach. John really talked about the fact that many clients operate in these little circles where you're doing all kinds of things around your data, your kind of data-centric world, and that what we're really moving towards now is a world where all of these circles tie together. If you believe you're doing big BIM as you're working for a single client and only dealing with their data, I think you need to really rethink your position, because what we're moving towards is many clients using data in a central, authoritative kind of way, where the data is an authoritative data source, and it's not just associated with one client or one group of clients, but it's a general store of information. And I think that's what you're going to see next. And Kimon, I'll hand it back to you. I think you maybe have some more, want to emphasize this a bit more.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Fyneth. That was perfect. And I also want to remind everybody that Fyneth is the author of Big BIM, Little BIM, essentially coining the term Big BIM years ago, before even a lot of the big data discussions have started up. And now we're seeing the convergence of big data with Big BIM, and that's an incredibly exciting time for us in the industry. It's been many years, but I think it's all coming together. So thanks, Fyneth, for that, and we'll come back to you later in the discussion.
Okay.
So going back to the concept of stuff and assets, we've all become very used to thinking of digital documents and digital information. We used to be much more paper-centric, even though there's still a lot of paper around us. But even with digital information and documents and file exchanges, data is trapped still in the wrong format. It's still trapped in documents or files or even BIMs. And we even talk about data exchanges, for that matter. They're important, but I mean file exchanges and document exchanges, but not the actual access to the data. So today we're going to be talking about data and data in BIM, and this project that was through the National Institute of Building Sciences that we worked on for the Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Defense looked at closed systems that already existed in the government agency, and the SEPS, the Space and Equipment Planning System, is one example of that. You had to log in behind a firewall to even get to the data, and you had to get to this piece of software. We guided the development and the strategy toward moving it toward open and secure but open systems, getting the data outside of the application, and then building data services on top of that. This is a mandate from the White House, essentially. It's a government agency should make their data accessible internally and externally in a secure way. And we described it like Legos. It's basically you can plug and play different applications, and Fyneth's point about applications are important, but they're no longer the center of the universe. You have to have these applications that can share the same data, and then you have to also plan for the future where new applications, just like when you open up our mobile devices, we plug and play different mobile apps as needed. We don't have to throw the data away. The most valuable asset, like we said from the Coast Guard's quote, is the data and information about the facilities. If you don't treat the data as an asset and it's trapped inside a black box, all of a sudden the value of your assets is going down very rapidly. And these new technologies that we've all become used to working with, we've all come to expect having mobile access to complex data in simple ways and being able to just plug and play any tool that we want to and work with the information. So we've actually put together a facilities and assets, a life cycle playbook, which we will share with those that are going to be involved with the BIM storm. And last week we talked about, from an owner's perspective, what's the minimum that an owner can do to make their data accessible internally to their organization, also externally to the AEC community. So number 1, 2, and 3, essentially, it's very simple steps. Where is your data, first of all, because it could be in multiple places. Identify where is your information about what your programming requirements are. They're usually scattered around in PDFs or Excel files or in people's heads. Collect all that in one place. Identify the authoritative source. Create a very simple tabular list like Excel, just listing, well, here's all our standards. Host the data somewhere, even on a Google Docs for that matter, just somewhere that everybody can get to it and say, okay, here's the list of information that we need to how we call departments and buildings, spaces and equipment, and then create a mandate to use that information. In other words, as an owner, if you don't state that this is our information and here's how we use it internally and here's how we expect our consultants and vendors to work with that, then there's no central place to kind of look at. If they get to step 5, then the AEC community can respond to that, the AEC community and the IT community, to work on ecosystems that plug into this as Legos. And that's what we're going to demonstrate today. This is not just a theory. This actually happened through the National Institute of Building Sciences project for the VA and DoD. So the key questions to keep in mind as we go through this webinar is what is big data and big BIM? Like Fineth talked about in his big BIM book, we need to move into a big BIM world, and there's a ton of data in these facilities, and especially during the life cycle. And also number two, what's the difference between an electronic document and a file exchange and a data exchange? Just because you have electronic documents or electronic BIMs and you park them on the web, you're not working in a data exchange format. In other words, we don't go to Uber and ask for a file exchange to get an electronic document or a PDF from Uber to call an Uber. We push a button and ask Uber to come to us, and all the data in the background is crunching information to get that to you. The building industry is not obviously all there yet, but we are perfectly positioned to move into that big data world. And then from the Building Smart perspective, being part of Building Smart Alliance and the standards that have developed over the years, IFC is very important and a perfect format to do file exchanges with, and a perfect format to start talking about data exchanges. But we cannot wait for a perfect standard to be in place. We have to start now, just like the owner said, with what we have and work with it. And what's the concept of a minimum viable BIM? And how do owners work with full BIM for facilities management? Heidi is going to be talking about that as well. And what can we as an industry do for owners now? We need to be able to deliver value to them. So what's a minimum viable BIM, really? Minimum is an important concept in software development, minimum viable product, but minimum doesn't mean not good or not enough information. It's actually what's the maximum impact with a minimum data that we can have right now. And BIM is not only defined in full-blown 3D models, it's actually the data in the models as well. So in the VA and DoD's case, they manage spaces and equipment for healthcare. And this kind of data just starts exploding in complexity because you have a dental exam room like this that's surrounded by equipment. The equipment standards are constantly changing as new practice comes along. New standards change. So it's a constantly moving target. It's not static. And the space and equipment planning system on the web that they have now actually has this equipment data cataloged in a way and accessible through what's called a web service in a digital format, not only to their own internal software, but now for the first time ever, I don't think we've seen another owner actually doing this, where they've opened up their data, government data, to the outside world in a secure and open way. So if you ask the question, what goes into a dental exam room for VA that I need to build in this location, those IDs and everything are matching to their database. So if they change their standard, then we, from the AEC industry, can pull those into tools and start doing work with them, putting them into BIM. And if you break down this data into simple formats, it's actually extremely simple. So simple that you might think, well, this is not important and not significant. But it is so important to have a consistent standard. And the standard doesn't have to be necessarily agreed upon between all the owners. Just as long as you have consistency of what do you call spaces and what's the ID of that department and how many square feet is an office and what's the ceiling height in inches as a VA catalogs it in inches. In their SEP system, they actually say it's 144 inches versus how many feet, right? But that doesn't matter. As long as it's consistent, you can convert this. The same thing with equipment. This is the listing part, that create a tabular list of your stuff so we can get a consistent naming standard in place. And then what's happened now with the SEP to BIM process is now this data is on the web and you can get to it without any login. You don't have to have a login to get to it because this is their standard. That is basically, there's nothing secure about it. It's saying, how do we put in a dental exam room together? And that data then feeds into an online tool that creates on the fly a BIM and other formats. And I'll show that next. So this is, I'm going to do something next. I'm going to go away from PowerPoint and break all the rules about live presentations and actually go live and see if it works. So we're going to go to a website here. And you can actually try this. We'll send you the links to this. It's sepstobim.org. It's a utility and a place online that explains what the VA's standards are, VA and DoD's standards for spaces and equipment. Not only explains them, but actually has technical hooks into it, web services and APIs that you can connect to it, and also has simple utilities that you can call up those standards. So, for example, I can call up a single room. Let's say I want to see what a dental exam room looks like. Or I can call up an entire department. I can say, well, I want to see pull down to dental service and this pull down here, this is actually their database, the VA and DoD database that I'm hitting right now, that what they call all of their departments. And I'm going to put in my email address here and hit proceed. And this is going to basically create a live link that pulls from their database in real time. Okay, it's done, and I'm going to receive an email, and that email is going to say, okay, you've asked for this, and here comes the email. This is a real-time connection to VA data that creates a view of that information, and I can then put it into a browser and say, what is that space all about? So this is building their space on the fly from that database we talked about, and other information that's also stored in a database about location of equipment within a space, and builds a BIM on the fly of all that, and builds a COBie on the fly and a Revit and a SketchUp file exchange, export that can happen from here. So here's all the equipment coming in. So if this morning somebody on the VA or DoD system decided to change their standard of what a dental exam room looks like, I would actually see this on the fly in these spaces. This is actually an online utility that is using their data along with the Onuma system plugins that we have that we've developed over the years for these tools, and you can do a lot of other things with it. To make another point, the same data also is pulled into a simple format. So simple access to complex data. Here's an iPad app that we see a lot of different iPad apps about BIM on the web available now. That's actually an Onuma version of it. But this is the entire dental department that was created on the fly with equipment. If the location is known of how they want to recommend an initial layout of a room, it's actually showing here. If it's not known, it's stacked to the side. So let's look at this one dental exam room. And we look at this piece of dental equipment, and we pull up the data. This name of the chair had come in from their database, so if they added more information, it would actually show up there. So that's the real-time access to the complex data. Okay, and then one more thing. I'll show, before we get into Revit next, I'm going to show the same thing happening now from the SketchUp. So in SketchUp, on the 3D Warehouse, SketchUp and 3D Warehouse actually has cataloged all the VA and DoD standard medical equipment in SketchUp format as well, with the names and everything are coming again from that database. It was pulled into here. And you can go and grab them one by one from 3D Warehouse and put them into SketchUp. But in SketchUp, there's a plugin that basically goes and allows you to grab the information from the file that we just created of that space from the website. And this is basically going and grabbing, it says how many square feet is it, what's the size of that room, what piece of equipment do I need ID from that. It goes to 3D Warehouse, grabs it, and places it in that location. And if I open this up, it's going to start streaming in. So it's literally going to 3D Warehouse and grabbing all the pieces that it needs that align with this owner's requirements. So this is a real-time creation of a BIM, 3D BIM file, or data file from the system. Okay, so we'll let that run in the background and come back to that. So that's conceptually what's been happening is the creation of the spaces from the data live. I showed that to you live with the web utility. And next we showed the live demo of the web utility, and this is the structure of what I just showed you. The green data is housed on the DoD VA servers. The blue are the rules of how that data gets put out on the web, or if you need to log in if you're doing an actual project, which Matt will show next. And the spaces and equipment that are generated with the different tools are built in real time. And the most interesting thing that's happened is that once this group of owners have put their data on the web, other BIM vendors have come in and said, hey, here's how we can hook into that. And we'll show more of this object connection of BIM into this next week's session using Atania and the 3D Warehouse that I showed you as well, and ArchiCAD and Revit. But they're all using the same data and essentially creating the same model with the same attributes automatically in their application for the designers to continue to do the work on. Show the SketchUp live version, and we're going to be going into Matt's session next. So Matt, if you're ready, I'd like to introduce yourself. Matt Angeli from AECOM, thank you very much for joining us and being part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Kimon. Let me share my screen here, and we'll get started. So what I want to focus on today is the AEC process, and this is from a live example that we have showing a project that we're working with the VA on. It's a large healthcare facility, and it's currently in the middle of its design process, but we were introduced to SEPs to BIM early, and we decided to adopt this into our program. So a little history on how we've managed data in the past as an AEC, and potentially currently in some of our firms. We go to a standard library, and I'm sure every firm has their own custom library of parts, and it's unique in that it does not contain a lot of the data that we're trying to track within BIM. But we go to that library, we bring in that object into Revit, we place that in the space it's supposed to be designed in. We add data, and typically that's a team member that spends days adding the data to those objects just so that we can schedule it. And ironically, often we take that schedule and we export it back out to Excel or out to a standalone or isolated data set. And we do this for thousands of pieces of equipment and objects and components across our project. And really the time that we bear on adding data and maintaining data across our project is fairly laborious. And the challenge is that without a clear guideline from our clients or the industry that we can settle on, we do have a variation of that data, how it's entered and what we're tracking. And it's almost as unique as the number of firms that we have in the world doing design. So it's very important that we do isolate and focus on what is the appropriate approach here. And as an example here, again, we're talking about how the VA has approached this and what steps they're making. So again, working with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs on a large healthcare facility, we've recognized what advancements they're making through SEPs to BIM. And like Kimon said, it's a free service, and the gist of it is that it materializes SEPs data into BIM objects. And it references the MLSD TD 1691 library to do that. But not only does it pull those objects and pull the data from SEPs, but it applies those attributes directly to those objects as they come into your authoring software. And it's authoring software, almost authoring software agnostic, but in this case we're going to show Revit. And the significance of this is that when we get these objects and bring them into our design authoring software, we have that consistency, and we can track this asset now through the entire building lifecycle, and then leverage BIM as we see is intended to make well-informed decisions and do that much earlier in the process. So the example that I'm going to show in Revit is, again, a large healthcare facility, and I'll just touch on the things that we have done with that data. So in Revit, we get a file from SEPs to BIM, and as Kimon was showing, that it builds those out of the SEPs database. But we receive these as native Revit objects, and again, we can select on this information and dive into what that data is that's been applied to it. And it gives us all the information that we need to use to track this asset within BIM itself. And not only is it by the instance of that object, but we're also tracking what types of those objects, so we have consistency, and provides us the information that we need to know when we go to the approval process and then hand this over, leveraging the data through BIM as we hand this off all the way through FM. So that library looks something similar to this, where we get native components, again, that are in Revit, and we could use this as a library then to transfer from our library of parts by department and bring that into our authoring software, into the authoring files, the design files. This is an example of the architectural plan for one of the departments, and showing how we're bringing in not only just the objects, but the rooms itself have pertinent data that we track. It gives us design metrics like what the program area should be at the design phase, what our actual areas are in Revit, and then again, when we bring in the equipment assets, we can track that against what rooms they're in, and we have the metrics to track those throughout the design process. So as an example, you can see that this gives us a huge advantage in leveraging what information we're receiving from the client. We can directly utilize that in our design softwares and then transfer that throughout our design phases. And then the data. Obviously, we're tracking data as it is important to us and to the industry. But now that we have that data set that comes to us in a consistent way, we can track it with the GeoID numbers against those assets, and then the pertinent information that we need for us to validate it comes in through SEPs, and then we can, again, maintain that. So one of the key advantages, I'm going to jump back over to the PowerPoint slide. Again, the key benefits for AEC and the clients are that we do have that consistent asset metric, and we can track that. We obviously have improved understanding of the project as we go through these different phases, and it focuses the design teams more on pre-planning and design than it does on data introduction and maintaining information. Because it comes to us complete, we can now focus on the true important parts of the project and know that we have that foundation of information that is correct and it is validated. So with that, Kumon, I'd like to pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Matt. That was perfect. Actually, a couple of questions and comments as you're finishing up here. You were the first AE firm actually that has come to the SEPs to BIM process to test and validate it to this point, and you've actually given us great input on adjusting some of the workflows, and very valuable for VA to hear from you on that. And I think on a project as large as the one that you're working on, there's, I think we actually counted the number of data points. There's literally hundreds of thousands of data points, if not millions, by the time you start counting attributes and everything. But even on a small project, it starts adding up pretty quickly. And the pace of change as you're going through the design process, there's back and forth, obviously, as we all know, as architects, that there's changes that happen. You have to track them. So we're hoping that the AEC industry can see value in this and provide value back to these owners now that have made their data available in this format to help the industry move forward and help the owners to actually fulfill their objectives on the project. So thank you very much for your presentation. We'll come back to question and answer with you as we get to the next section. So this is actually the document. What Matt just showed are the steps. We obviously didn't go into the details of each one, but we will be using these documents, and there are step-by-step approaches and videos, and it's actually not really that complicated. You still have to do the design work, obviously, but you're basically getting this big data, electronic data, to you in your tool of choice, and then working with that to complete the project. And by having this data structured from the very beginning and not waiting till the end of the project to deliver it back, there's obviously a lot of potential for value during the project, but then as you deliver it back to the owner, a lot of the owners are asking for their data to manage it from an asset perspective, like Fineth described earlier. And we have next with us Hyde Griffith, who has worked with us on several projects, GSA and others, together, and he's going to give us his perspective of what he saw here, as well as what he's been working on with other owners, and you can find some patterns of what's happening here. So Hyde, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me participate. Can you go to the next slide? As Kimon said, we have been working with Onuma for a number of years. Can you go one more slide? We began our introduction to this topic back in about the 2005 to 2008 time frame, where brought us. We are a program and project management company, and we found it important to start understanding this topic of BIM so that we could represent owners properly and understand what was happening in the AEC industry. I was introduced to Kimon when I was working on a Texas A&M project, and began working with him in the Enuma system in the 2008-2009 timeframe. And since then, we've been expanding those services and continuing to help owners with this topic. And one of the things we noticed over the course of working as owners, project managers, was that we would get to the end of the project, substantial completion, final completion, and we had these big complex buildings, biocontainment labs, research facilities, medical facilities. We were handing over these very complex assets, and we saw owners struggling mightily with the transition to operations. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so we started to, since then, we've been working in this space to come up with a more simplified approach. We've broken it down into about 6 different steps for us, and it's interesting that I hadn't seen your playbook until yesterday, but many of the things that we've been developing parallel your playbook in terms of these 6 steps of planning, specifying, collecting information, verifying it or validating it, importing it into the systems of record for owners, and then they operate from their systems of record. But one of the big things that we have tried to focus on has been the first bullet there, looking at the owner's operational platform needs. For example, what do they need to operate with? What data, what documents, what models or links to models do they need? And so we sort of, you know, the phrase we use a lot in this industry is begin with the end in mind, and I think this is one of these places where owners need the most help because the AEC community, like Matt was saying, they're starving for direction from owners on how to structure data at the front end to allow them to design efficiently. We've also put in place a number of places a flexible BIM execution process, and 2 of the things we've focused on with this has been specifying prescriptive criteria where it matters for owners, so that the information can be standardized, like Simone was saying, with lists and nomenclature and standardized attributes and things of that nature. That's where we find ourselves working with owners, is specifying their CMMS or facilities management data. That becomes an input to the SEPs to BIM type process to start structuring that data. So we're prescriptive where we need to be, and in other cases we are very performance criteria based or outcome based, where we leave it to the AEC community to manipulate that data and produce the outcome. And so as owners reps, we found that if we overspecify, then we are now starting to dictate and drive business processes, and that becomes very disruptive to the AEC community, and it becomes very expensive to owners. So we've, over the years, sort of tried to find this balance between the prescriptive and the performance-based, but all of it really is tied back to the structured and open data with accessibility, and the open nature of that data also helps keep these AEC teams accountable to the progression and the development of that data. The other aspect that, in terms of the life cycle, that we've gotten into in the last year or so, a couple of challenges we found with doing this for owners was we could specify, we could collect, and then we would get to the end. It's like getting down to the 1-yard line and not being able to score a touchdown. We would hand this information over to owners, and in many cases they struggled with how to get that into their operational platform. So in the last year or so, we've been working with owners and developing automation and importing procedures that mimic somebody sitting at a computer to actually write that data and copy it into their systems of record, CMMS systems, space planning systems, anything that's web-based. Essentially, we can write that data into. And this has been really important because one of the hurdles with these systems of records is owners many times have to turn to them and pay somebody from that company to import their data. So being able to think about all that in advance is very important. We've also found that in many cases we develop these massive amounts of the big data on these projects, all this AEC and model information, but what we're finding over the last few years with owners is that there's a minimal set of data, like you were saying, Kimon, that they really need in their operational platforms to function, to track assets, to write work orders, et cetera. And so though we don't want to throw all that information away, most owners we're working with do not have a place and do not want to put all that information in their systems of record because it's just more information to maintain. Many of them are preferring to archive those models for the next design team, or to at least have those deliverables that have been developed by the AEC team captured and archived. So I think the important, you can go to the next page, I think the important thing about that is being able to identify the minimum information that's needed and to be able to segregate what information we need or an owner needs out of the entire process in order to call out the information they need to operate. So the flow chart down below sort of describes what I was talking about. The 6 steps above is sort of the simplified version, and I'm an engineer, as you may be able to tell, but looking at these green blocks, that's where we kind of start of looking at the operational objectives or the CMMS scopes of work, and then combining that with item number 1, what are the BIM use cases that make sense and the project program of requirements that go into this. And then item 3, as I talked about a little bit, is just figuring out what is the right BIM execution plan. We provide a framework that allows that prescriptive and performance-based contracting to come along. And then item number 4 is really important from the standpoint of being able to, if we can't specify it, then we can't contract for it. And 4 main items of that are just the content. What is it we're asking for? The format, how do we want it delivered? The division of responsibility is related to who's going to give that to us. Is it the architect, the engineer, the commissioning agent? And the schedule is just the data progression. What's the progression of that information throughout the life cycle? So I think the work that you're doing with steps to BIM and the VA is critically important, and it ties into some similar work that we're seeing, but the ability to take that data and like in the schedule, to progressively build upon it, add to it, validate it in the field, and move from generic requirements to submittal approved and field-specific data is terribly important. And ultimately being able to close the deal and get that imported into the systems of record is really where owners want to be in terms of the operational use of that information.
That's great. Thank you very much, Hayden. Yeah, it's kind of a bookend. You described essentially on the back end what's needed, and we're describing, well, here if we think of the front end, the two meet in the middle, and there's also incredible stuff that happens during design and construction with BIM that feeds into both sides or uses both sides. So thank you very much for that overview. So Steve Hagen next is one of the BIM champions, used to be at GSA, an early pioneer of defining how BIM is being used by owners, and now has his own company, Hagen Technologies, who we've worked with on these VA and DoD projects through NIBS. Steve, are you ready?
Yes, I'm right here. Come on, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you,
Yeah,
Steve.
if you want to launch just a couple, I think I'm just going to do like 2 or 3 slides, and really, didn't we have one before that about the all the players and the life cycle, or is this the first one?
Yeah, it's the next one, actually.
Oh, okay, we're not good. Okay, so very briefly, because I know we have just a few 16 minutes left, and we really want to hear, I think we probably are getting some comments from the attendees, and we really want to be able to respond and interact with them. But one of the key things I think you've heard from all of the speakers up till now is life cycle, finding out what real work is being done, really getting into that work and the workflow, the steps you take, and then what is the status quo? And what I think we will find in almost every part of the life cycle, from planning all the way through to facility management, and putting a microscope on the way we do things today, which is in an analog, many cases 2D, or even 3D world with very expensive electronic tools, and yet we dumb them down, send them forward as unintelligent paper documents. We have a little bit of a way still to go, and a lot of hard work and commitment to really making us much more interactive, connected. And so one of the things we did, this slide kind of illustrates that value proposition that we think is just the tip of the iceberg of what could happen. We looked at the Department of Defense and their health system that manages work orders across all of their facilities worldwide, and spent a little time documenting what happens when someone goes out, finds something wrong in a building or a system or a space, documents it, comes back, enters it into the system. Someone else then sends a tech out in the field to respond to it, and there is continual amount of very analog kind of silos of steps along the way, and then calculating that across an organization. And you could take this as your own firm or ask this of any of your projects or your clients, and I think you'd be astounded at what this adds up to. And so we said across all of the work orders they have almost 800,000 work orders in a year, and how much time it takes in that to collect the work order, enter the data, send someone out to fix it, and then re-enter it and close out the work order. It came out to $113 million being spent by them. And that was just one aspect of it. You could, add any of the others. So I think this is a good little slide for anyone to take on and say, well, before I talk to the client, and here's a great slide of all the different stakeholders you have on your projects and throughout the life cycle, and all the different things that are happening along there. And just ask the question, so how can I look at those steps, maybe automate them, have them take some waste out of the flow of processes, and then put some numbers on it. And that's the sort of thing that will really resonate with your clients as you start to talk about how much time and money they're spending and how much time and money you could save. And that may well be your project you're working on or your team just simply helping them reinvent themselves as you go along through the project. Next slide, I think. Is that, we just had the two slides? Oh, and then, so I guess I would come back to really the theme of all the presenters up to now is a lot about data. So we hear about BIM, and we hear about BIM objects, we hear about a lot of complicated graphics, but behind all of that is the data, the actual thing you're going to be working on, and all of its cost, its weight, its various features, and its longevity and how you maintain it and keep a record of it. And data is really, really important, and it would be ideal if the data could flow in once and then be accessible to all of the team members through the life cycle. So that's kind of the nirvana, but I think that's something that everyone keeps working on step by step, and we would really appreciate all of those on the call to kind of engage with us, not just on this call, but an ongoing discussion about that. So I'll hand it back to you, Kimon.
Thanks, Steve. That's perfect. So now we're going to go into a group discussion. We'll try and keep it a little bit shorter than we planned so we can allow the audience to jump in as well, too, after this. But one question I have to all of us, actually, and we've been at this for many years, all of us working in BIM and working with owners and many sides of the table, different hats we have, visionaries and big BIM and all that. It really strikes me that a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, we already have been processing it for years. It's not like we're pulling it out and just out of thin air. It's already been around us. It's just that now is a chance to format it in a way to create more value for us as organizations and more value for the clients that we serve, and increase the potential for collaborating, because it's not going to be done by one group. It has to be kind of a collaborative effort as the complexity of these projects and needs of the environment and all that get stacked together. So what opinions do you, anybody can jump in and just, what do you think about that? What opportunity do we have here? Where can we go next as we're talking to the industry?
guess, Kimon, this is fine. I guess I can jump in.
Yes, please.
Here. You know, one of the things I think everybody needs to understand is there's so many opportunities in this that it often comes that, you know, it sounds like we're talking about the federal government or VA. It sounds like, you know, we're talking about, wow, how do you get these really cool, highly detailed objects into Revit? But the reality is what we're talking about is using the data to streamline, to be a force multiplier of what architects and engineers and contractors have always done. And you know, I think back to, you know, when I was designing schools, you know, the owner would hand me a program, usually on a piece of paper or in a book. Sometimes, if I was lucky, as in a spreadsheet. I'd go out and I'd design the project. I'd get the schematics. I'd have to go through a process of parsing my design into something that the owner could then check against their program. You know, and you went through this sort of manual validation every step of the way. Well, now what we're doing with the data is we're basically creating a scenario where the owner can validate the work that's being given to them by their AEC team almost instantaneously and with almost no additional work on anybody's part. And I think as an industry, we need to realize that's what's going on. This is not about how do you do a bigger, better, fatter, more clicky, prettier model, you know, graphic model. This is about taking what we did before, you know, basically streamlining it with the data and getting a lot more out of it, and then carrying it on forever. Because what we're doing now, these are models, and this is information that doesn't go stale. It doesn't BIM data rot. This is data that carries on forever and streamlines things like the validation of the design concept all the way through to the day that the building gets torn down and started over again. And, you know, I think that's the overlay on this past each of us doing all these projects for these one specific client is that happens everywhere in every part of the AEC industry.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And one more point from your firm and my firm and Onuma, we're smaller companies, but we've been using them for a long time and have seen tremendous value in the types of services we can provide to owners. And maybe I could switch to Matt if you're online right now. From an opposite perspective, obviously AECOM is the complete other side, but the reality is that these workflows and processes scale to any size project and any size firm. It's not limited to what each of us has been doing. But what do you think, Matt, in terms of the opportunities here?
Yeah, thanks, Kimon. AECOM is unique in the sense that we have a global perspective on this. And while we are very large in our companies, we have focuses on geographies, but at the same time, we work across the pond, if you will, with other offices in our own company that deal with data in very different ways. So from the global perspective, data is going to rule all here in the near future. And it's really coming from the sense that the BIM has such huge opportunities to help our design teams and help the clients in today's technology and in the future to start to really fully understand your building throughout the entire life cycle. So yeah, the Internet of Things and the way that we interact with those objects that we place, you know, in our sense, it's those objects, while they need to represent graphically what we're designing, they are buckets that we pour data into so that we make them a true life cycle object all the way throughout the process.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And speaking about life cycle, we'll go back to Hyde, because I think, Hyde, you've been the connector between what architects have been producing and what the owners need, and you pretty nicely outlined that. But how much data do owners really need for FM? You've already touched on that, but do you want to add anything too?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I think one of the things that that we were when we the more we got into this and started working with facility staff, as we realized that they were really excited about just getting even some minimal information, but getting it normalized and consistent, as opposed to them having to go out and job crawl every project at the end of the day. And so, though all this massive amount of data is being developed, many owners are, at least some of the ones we're dealing with in the higher education world, are a little hamstrung in their ability to really digest all of that data. So we're starting small and sort of meeting them where their greatest need is, which is the minimal BIM model, like you were saying. But what that does is it creates opportunities in the development of standards and the dialogue to say, well, where else could you use this? It opens up the discussion. So we've also looked at ways of leveraging, and we've done this with a number of clients, leveraging 3D models by taking them and essentially stripping out. I know this is going to be counterculture. This is a rebellious statement, but stripping data out of them, post-processing them through gaming engines to make them lightweight and deployable, but keeping a GUID, if you will, or an equipment asset ID to make the model lightweight and searchable, and creating links between CMMS systems and Navisource models that are really lightweight. And we're finding owners to find that a whole lot more helpful because the data that they need is in their system of record, and yet we can leverage the models to give them sort of a visual orientation and a visual cue. You know, they've archived the big BIM, and that's there, but we're just kind of finding that that's where some owners are finding a sweet spot in terms of implementation, and they're excited to have that. So I think we're going to get to, I think as we start with these lower, more simpler objectives, it makes owners ready to go to the next step and to eventually get to the place that they're operating at higher levels of complexity. But it's just so hard for them to digest it and to get started. Thank you.
Right. Perfect. Thanks. Stripping the BIM. I like that. We could post that somewhere. Okay. So, Mike, do you want to jump in and get some questions from the audience? Yeah.
Sure. This is Mike Bordner. There's one for Steve asking about the GSA's approach to BIM. Can you anything on what's going on with the GSA, Steve?
They're continuing to do some very significant things. Region 4 in Atlanta has some new work, amazingly enough, new funded courthouses, and they were always kind of the leader in it. So there's this effort to increase the tools through the architect and construction managers to stay on top of that. They actually have internal teams that are GSA employees at Region 4 that are doing some amazing stuff on kind of smaller fit-out projects inside some of those courthouses. And then they're working on the idea of a repository for all of this BIMs as you finish the project and it comes back into the enterprise system. How do you record it? How do you archive it? How do you make it accessible? Big challenge, but they certainly have the scale to work on. So that's one of their big projects right now.
Excellent. And we have a question from Gerardo Mico asking about the standards to use for the BIM projects. Where can you find these standards? Simone, is that something you can address?
Sure. Well, obviously the Building Smart Alliance has a lot of the BIM standards developed. We are going to be working on what's called a BIM storm, where a lot of what you saw today for the SEPs to BIM and program to BIM and the VA work, and then even non-healthcare work, we're going to be setting up sample projects with training material. It's free to join and participate, and we will be heading towards Washington, D.C. or online in October, up to October from July till October. So there's multiple places you can find information about that, as well as obviously our webinars that we're continuing on to next week. You'll see more specifics about how you set up objects next week, for example.
Okay, so that's nibs.org and BIM.
Yeah, bimstorm.com/BIE. Then there's Building Smart International. There's a lot of resources on the web. But our point of the webinar today is we can actually start from a very simple place and still fits into those standards. So everything that we showed today, for example, fits into COBE and ultimately IFC as you head in through BIM. So you don't have to have everything figured out, but you need just a starting point, basically.
And we've got a couple of...
Matt, I'd also like to add that the SEPs to BIM process brings in all the shared parameters that you need to track those assets. So
exactly.
You get some of those through that SEPs to BIM process.
We've got a couple more questions that we'll get back to directly to you because we're out of time now. Kimon, if you can wrap up.
Sure. So I think we are going to have a webinar next week as well, talking about objects and how manufacturers and other groups are linking into it. And the fourth one is IT professionals on June 30th, and we'll actually be physically in DC and on the web for that one. And I think that's pretty much it for me. Is there anything else, Mike, that you'd like to wrap up with?
We've got the webinar next week, which is going to be focusing on manufacturer equipment in a format that is useful for consultants to provide to owners. So please sign up for that. And the following week will be on the IT element, which will be interesting. You don't have to learn about the how to do the actual coding, but you need to understand what's going on with it. So that'll be important for everyone.
Great, perfect. So thank you very much to all of our panelists and speakers today, and to the audience for listening in and posting your questions. And we will be sending out an email with a link to this recording for you that have signed up. And please join us in the next few weeks and follow us in the BIM storm. Thank you very much. I'm signing